This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hello, this is Eliran Glaser. I am the CFO of Monday.com, and you are listening to CFO Thought Leader.
This is episode 926.
What's more important to me is making sure I have the right people who are accountable in the right areas. So it's all about people, succession planning, retention, mentoring, one. And then two, being very thoughtful about capital allocation and making sure we're spending our precious capital in the right areas and making the right decisions on capital allocation. And that requires not just analysis, the what, it requires conversations internally with the teams who are promoting ideas, but also conversations externally with experts to try to get to the best decision in the long-term interests of Cox.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak with Dallas Clement, CFO and President of Cox Enterprises. As our listeners know well, one of our favorite queries for finance executives with lengthy tenures is what kept you there? It goes without saying, the word opportunity is perhaps the most popular response. Still, for certain finance leaders, frequently those with careers spanning multiple decades with a single company, the question summons a degree of self-reflection few other questions achieve. Such was the case with CFO Dallas Clement of Cox Enterprises, who issued some of the best career advice that we've ever shared on this podcast. Or so we believe. You be the judge. We begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking with Dallas Clement, CFO of Cox Enterprises. Dallas, welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for allowing me to participate.
Well, it's great to have you with us. And Dallas, as our listeners know well, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us. We'd love to have you look back and try to identify some of the experiences you feel best prepared you to become a CFO. What comes to mind?
Well, let me first start by saying I think there's multiple kinds of CFOs. There's a CFO that is more of a controller type, more dot the I's, cross the T's, and then there's a CFO that is more strategic and business partner. And I'm not any good at the former. I'm better at the latter, and I like the latter. So the stars have aligned. And I'd start by saying I'm dyslexic. And by virtue, and I learned a long time ago, even in school, that it takes me a little bit of time to, quote, get it. So I never did well on midterms, but in order to learn the material, I had to think about it from multiple different angles. So when you got to the final and they tried to trick you. I'd already thought about it in that way, so I tended to do very well in the finals, and then did fine for the final grade. And so, to a certain extent, the dyslexia has helped me think more broadly and helped me to think about all the corners of a box on a problem, etc. And so, all throughout my work career, I've been able to use that as a way to learn, as a way to frame questions, ask questions, learn on any particular job. I was an applied math major in college. I never took a finance class in college. And so right out of college, I followed a lot of folks down to Wall Street and got one of those investment banking analyst jobs. And I distinctly remember trying to figure out how you actually worked 80 hours. And I got out my fingers and toes and said, that's 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and then another 10 hours on Saturday and 10 hours on Sunday. And, it really was 80 hours. It wasn't 12 hours on Monday through Friday. It was more like 14 or 16. And I learned a lot. I learned finance. I learned discounted cash flows. I learned modeling. I learned acquisitions. I learned how to price a bond, et cetera. And that was all. And I also learned what I like in the workplace and what I don't like in terms of managers, peers, how you work together in teams, how you work on projects, and how you see how the project evolves over time. And I learned and so I learned a lot. I also learned I didn't like that. And so I left and went to graduate school. And out of graduate school, the internet hadn't been invented yet. I was in Silicon Valley. That hadn't been anointed yet. Was at Stanford. And so I sort of looked at the paper and, how do you decide where to go? And I landed on this media company in Atlanta called Cox Enterprises. And I said, hey, I was born and raised in Florida, get back to the East Coast. That's a good thing. It was a role in strategic planning. That sounded interesting, and Atlanta sounded fun. So I came to Atlanta, and I never thought I'd stay at Cox for now 33, 34 years. And I've been very lucky in that I've done a variety of things, not just strictly, quote, finance, in terms of functional roles, including investor relations, FP&A, corporate development, M&A. I've run strategy. I've run product. I've had technology reporting to me. I've had legal reporting to me. I've done a bunch of different things in two different industries. So I was in the cable broadband industry as it evolved from an analog video business in 1990 to a full-fledged broadband, digital video, high-speed internet, digital voice, residential services, commercial services, and I ran product during that and in and out of trying to get into wireless. And so I learned a lot. I did that for 20 years. And then I moved over to Auto Trader as a CFO, and I learned a completely new industry, the automotive services sort of industry. I learned more media, more internet by being CFO of a site. I learned software as a service because we did a number of acquisitions on bringing software companies into our fold to provide software solutions to dealers, CRM tools, inventory management tools, ERP tools, pricing tools, media tools, et cetera, and learned a lot. I learned merging companies. We merged Auto Trader and Manheim, two Cox wholly owned businesses, bringing them together, and I became CFO of that combined business. I learned a lot in that regard. I learned about public company, private company back when I was at Cox Communications. Cox Communications went public in 95 and then private again in 2004. So whether it was M&A, whether it was public company, investor relations, I learned there. I came to Cox Enterprises 8 years ago, and I have the privilege of being responsible for our diversification efforts. And so learning whole new industries, controlled environment agriculture, software to local governments and to sort of the education tech space, et cetera. So it's been a journey. And I was asked a couple of weeks ago, how do you take time to learn? And every role, every meeting I'm in, I learn something, and I ask questions, and I hope to continue to learn for many years to come.
Well, that 33-year stretch is interesting from a perspective of the industry you're part of. It's just reinvented itself a few times, and the internet was born 5 years after you arrive, only commercialized over the next 20 years, I suppose. And then there's the role of the CFO in finance. The finance function within companies are changing rapidly. And there's an individual like yourself who arrives there with an MBA.
Yeah, so actually I wasn't a Stanford MBA. I got a degree in engineering economic systems.
Oh, forgive
which
me.
No, that's okay. Which is essentially industrial engineering. So it's decision theory. It's a lot of math. And so when I came to Cox, to the cable group, I reported to the CFO of the cable group, and I was an analyst. And we were in the midst of being re-regulated, and I helped our marketing team understand the regulations and how to price our cable service given the regulations. At the time, we were the third largest franchisee of Blockbuster, and I helped budget for the stores and do financial planning for that business. I helped us determine how to price the tapes within the stores, how many tapes of new releases versus long tail to buy, et cetera. We did a number of acquisitions. And then at the time of the Gulf War, we decided to get out of that business. And so I ran a process to sell we had about 82 Blockbuster stores, and we got out. And at about the time we got out, we partnered with Southwestern Bell to invest in the UK to provide telephone and cable service over one network. And I was the financial analyst supporting that investment and that business because we were 50-50 partners with Southwestern Bell. McKinsey actually came in and did a big study for Cox Enterprises looking at the advertising market, regulation, and technology changes. And I was the liaison from the cable group to McKinsey. And so those early stages, I wasn't doing strict finance. It was much more strategic in helping the CFO with his accountabilities.
I tend to believe there weren't many finance hires like yourself. You were something of a
most people, finance hires come in through they were a CPA. They went from college and worked for a big 8 accounting firm or whatnot, and then came into the accounting group. In fact, my boss, the CFO of the cable division, that's how he came to Cox. He was a CPA. And so I think a lot of finance folks are that way. And I think over time, the finance role has evolved. And, so some finance folks come in having run a business for a smaller organization, but have a financial acumen. Some come in from the treasury area. Some come in from the investor relations area. Some come in from, corporate development or strategy sort of area.
And again, the mystery is what has kept you there. I mean, someone with your background could have gone any number of places to begin with. You arrive at the somewhat beginnings of what becomes a giant cable opportunity. Given the span of time that you've stayed, you've seen certain markets that have matured wonderfully be disrupted. And you had seen other opportunities that perhaps never matured the way they were supposed to, and others that perhaps did. But for someone who has put in the time that you have, what is it that kept you there? The span of time. I love asking this question. I know it's challenging to answer sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I would be disingenuous and lying if I said that the entire time of my 33 years I was happy and I wasn't enticed by job offers and I wasn't looking. There were several times throughout the career that I took calls, and I had at least 2, maybe 3 job offers to move somewhere else and do something different. And I'll tell you, I tell sort of young folks that are thinking about their career, you do the best you can, and you look at what's important to you. You look at what you have. The natural human inclination is to think grass is greener on something else, but you also learn that You are where you are, and that's the devil, and you go somewhere else, and hardly ever is the grass greener. But for me, early on, I wasn't even sure I wanted to be in Atlanta, and I might want to get back to Sarasota. So I applied to University of Florida Law School and was accepted. And I kept deferring, and I thought I might be an estate attorney down in Sarasota, living on the beach, and that seemed like a pretty good life. And I kept being enticed by the activities, the learning, the people, Atlanta, et cetera. And so I kept deferring, and finally I just said, no, that's not for me. And then later in my career, when I had offers, or when I had downturns, I took calls, and I went out to Silicon Valley, and my wife and I looked at homes, and for whatever reason in your heart, it just didn't feel right. And then I have 4 kids, and during the financial crisis, that it would have been pretty disruptive to the kids and highly risky, given that I got to put food on the table for 4 kids. Even if I wasn't completely happy in the current role, it would have been disruptive to leave, so I didn't leave. But then what I tell young folks is, once you've gone through that exercise and you've decided to stay, don't second guess yourself. Be all in and find ways to be happy when you decided to stay. Happy not only with the role, but more broadly about your life, your family, your outside the work activities, because, work is what you do. It's not who you are. I over time have learned to be more mature about it and more thoughtful about it, and really appreciate how lucky I've been in a variety of areas. I wasn't always that way, but I have learned. It's taken me a while. Yeah, a lot of gray hairs.
Thank you for that. Really nice overview and some honest insights for us. Professional and personal life coming together at all times. You've been, I just want to let the audience know that you've been CFO of multiple divisions, some of which you already mentioned, Cox Automotive, Auto Trader Group, Cox Communications, of course, where you're also the Chief Strategy Officer. You were a treasurer. You've held a lot of traditional finance roles. And I'm just playing off this theme where you're sort of not the traditional executive that we find, particularly when we look back to the 1990s.
Yeah. So if you go to the 1990s at Cox Communications, I was hired into the CFO shop. I did a variety of sort of M&A and strategic. Then we ended up being a public company February 1st of 95. And we had to decide, what do we do about investor relations? And so we had 2 choices. You take someone external who knows the street, knows investor relations, but doesn't know the management team, doesn't know the strategy, doesn't know the team, or do you take someone internal who knows the strategy, the team, is semi-intelligent, and you teach them investor relations? And so the leaders at that time decided they were more comfortable with the latter than the former. And so I launched into investor relations. And then our treasury group at Cox Enterprises, our holding company, who at the time Cox Enterprises owned 65+% of Cox Communications when Cox Communications went public. So Cox Enterprises was doing the treasury work for Cox Communications. The banks were only interested in the cable group. So they only asked the treasury group questions about the cable group. But the treasury group wasn't intimate enough with all the evolution of the cable group to broadband. We were doing a number of acquisitions. We were upgrading our cable plant to a hybrid fiber coax plant, spending a lot of money. Therefore, we needed to borrow money. And so then I went upstairs and focused on treasury for Cox Communications, learned the treasury skills from the existing treasurer, and I also did investor relations for Cox Communications. And so that's where I learned sort of the treasury function. And then I came back down, and during the heyday of the internet, we, like a number of big companies, lost some of our talent to early startups, and it opened up the role of sort of corporate development and strategy, reporting directly to the CEO of Cox Communications. And so I moved out from underneath the CFO, became a peer of the CFO, to report directly to the CEO to run strategy and corporate development. And pretty quickly we recognized, we need someone to run product. And here again, product is very much a matrixed organization. You're working with technology and customer care and marketing and field operations and finance, et cetera. And so you hire someone externally who knows product management and best practices skills, or do you have someone internally who knows all the various teams and the culture and the business and how to get things done and ask them to do it? And so they said, hey, Dallas, will you run product management? And I said, sure. And let me go hire people who have the functional expertise in project management. So I built a team. And so from 2000 to 2010, I had strategy. I was chief strategy officer and chief product officer.
And again, after a tour of duty such as that, you come back into some traditional CFO roles, I believe.
Well, so after that, I moved to Cox Communications had been private again, and the business was more mature. And at that time, Auto Trader, which was owned 75% by Cox Enterprises, and Cox Enterprises had sold 25% to Providence Equity, was doing a number of acquisitions. It was growing and evolving, and they needed someone to come in a senior role, happened to be the CFO role, to help provide a little bit of maturity, capability to that leadership team, because the thought at the time was that we would take Auto Trader public, and because I had public market experience, that would help. And so I went into that team. I learned the automotive services space, software and media for automotive services. I worked with a new team as CFO. I had legal reporting to me. I had strategy, corporate development, all the finance functions reporting to me, and was part of that leadership team and helped to drive board meetings with our partner, Providence Equity, who's a 25% owner, and provide support in terms of the way they need it for a portfolio company, because we were a portfolio company of Providence Equity. And so I was there. Cox Enterprises decided to pivot and not take Auto Trader public, but instead merge Auto Trader with Manheim to create Cox Automotive. So I helped to architect bringing the two of those together and integrating those two. At the same time, we acquired DealerTrack. So bringing DealerTrack into the fold to enhance Cox Automotive. And right as that was sort of coming together, that's when I moved to Cox Enterprises and sort of provided oversight over the entire portfolio.
Again, as someone who originally lands there as sort of a strategy-minded finance executive and climbs the ranks into leadership roles, curious how the finance function, the talent mix within the function, if you think back to the early 90s, maybe there were a lot more accountants wandering around, how you might have influenced how the finance function, how it grew to be more of a business partner over time. If you think back again to that, how it functioned back in the early 90s to how, what your expectations are today and the types of people you hire today. Has that mix changed?
What I, it's interesting. I just visited, we have 125 interns who interned with Cox this year, and I visited with the interns a week or 10 days ago, and I gave them sort of a speech. It was titled "Early Career Advice from an Old Guy," and one of the pieces of advice I gave them, as people come in and they ask me, "What do you do to succeed?" I say, "Okay, I think about it as the what and the how. You were hired to do something. That's the what. Do what you were hired to do. Do it credibly. Do it accurately. Do it well." But the way you differentiate and the way you advance within Cox, and I think for many companies, is the how. And the how is the way you work in a matrix environment. You work across teams. The how is how you support your teammates. The how is how you communicate, how you ask questions, how you engage. And Cox, the real differentiator as we think about leadership roles is, how is this person in their leadership capabilities, their how, and we would rather take a risk on someone who's really good on the how that we know versus someone who might be functionally better in the particular area, but there's uncertainty or questions on their leadership and the how. Because if you don't have good leadership, period, full stop, you're putting your back against the wall, a little bit of wind at your face. If you have a good leader, you can always hire the right experts underneath on the what. And so, to your question on within the finance function, I think the finance function is very much similar to what I said. And whether it's treasury, whether it's accounting, whether it's financial reporting, whether it's M&A, we'll hire young people in who, on their resume and with their experience, have the right capabilities in terms of the what for those particular areas. And then we try to train them, we try to support them, and we try to encourage them on the how. Not everyone can do it, but for those that can, we very much, especially in the finance function, want them to move to different roles so they have different experiences and understand different parts of the business. So as that when they get to be a leader, they can they can refer back to those various experiences, and they can better empathize and appreciate how different teams are trying to get their job done, and so that they can help be a better advisor, decision maker in that CFO leadership role.
So, given what you just shared, were there certain milestones before you got to have that mindset become part of the organizations? I mean, it's an evolutionary period. If we went back 10 years, I'm sure you weren't as evolved in your thinking on that subject.
Oh, for sure. I've been here 33 years. And as I said, I don't think I had the right empathy, the right style when I first came in. I certainly stubbed my toe a number of times. But I've learned. I've also learned. I've got 4 daughters, and I've learned from them, and I've learned that everyone is. The interesting thing about having 4 daughters, all 2 apart, is that before I had kids, I naively thought that girls were girls because grandma gave them dolls and dresses, and boys were boys because grandma gave them balls and trucks, and that we were 90% who we are because of the environment. And I've really come to appreciate we're 90% of who we are from the genes from day one. And you would have thought 4 girls 2 years apart ought to be very similar. They couldn't be more different. And that's really helped me to appreciate and understand the differences in people. And I've gotten a better appreciation of that over time. So in every role I've had, there's been things that I've learned that I've added to the portfolio of skills, observations, understanding that hopefully make me a better listener, a better communicator, and a better supporter of people, not just in the finance organizations, but in other organizations.
Well, Dallas, we probably have a few more career-related questions for you during our mentoring round, but right now we'd love to talk to you a little bit about Cox Enterprises. It's quite a large company today. The numbers I've seen, 55,000 employees. You can correct these. Tell us about Cox today, Cox Enterprises today. What is this company about today?
Sure. Well, in 2022, we did $22 billion of revenue. In 2023, we'll celebrate our 125th anniversary. We started when Governor Cox bought the Dayton Daily News, the 5th largest newspaper in Dayton, Ohio, 125 years ago. So we started as a media company. We've always been willing to take risks on new technologies, new business models, even if it disrupted existing business models. We don't take risks on financial risk, high leverage. In the governor's will, and as part of our value set, he said, do right by the customers that you serve, do right by the communities that you're involved with, do right by your employees, and the shareholders, the family, will be fine. And that's part of our value set. It continues to be. And so over time, we evolved from newspapers into radio, into television, into cable. And then some of the largest advertisers in those businesses are automotive. And so we had connection points into automotive, and we bought a Mannheim auction in Mannheim, Pennsylvania back in the 1960s. And so you move into the 1990s, and we had radio, television, newspapers, cable, Mannheim auctions, and the internet starts, and we realize, well, gosh, classified advertising is going to go away from the newspaper business and onto the internet, and who better to start an online automotive classifieds than Cox? And so we started autotrader.com. And so, we find where we are today, Cox Communications is our biggest company. We've got 13 to 14 billion of revenue within Cox Communications. Cox Automotive, which is Mannheim, Auto Trader, software companies, a little bit of international. We do a floor plan financing business called NextGear. And that business is between $8 and $9 billion. And then over the last couple of years, we've aggressively looked at opportunities to diversify those two big businesses. And we've made investments, acquisitions in controlled environment agriculture. One of those is Bright Farms, which builds and operates leafy green greenhouses. We're the majority owner of Mucci Farms, which is also a greenhouse business, but focused on vine crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, strawberries. And so that's a big effort for us. We've also looked at new media. So we are the majority owner of Axios, which is a digital journalism with a heavy focus on trying to sort of figure out a way to enable local journalism in a way that meets high journalistic standards, but also makes money. And so we are the majority owner of Axios. We have other investments, one in education tech, Amplify. Another focus has been in government technology, and we have a 30% stake in a company called OpenGov, which is helping cities, municipalities evolve from owning the technology, the servers, computers on their site, moving to the cloud, and moving to more software as a service. And so that's what OpenGov provides. So as a private company, we take the cash flow that our businesses generate, we reinvest in those businesses to keep them competitive and relevant in the markets that they serve. We will also invest organically and inorganically in adjacencies to those businesses. So for Cox Communications, that's things like getting into wireless. We have some dark fiber businesses, Segra, UPN. We're looking at internet as a service and building a business there. We're looking at managed services, helping small, medium businesses take advantage of the cloud. And so those are the kinds of things we do at Cox Communications. And then in Cox Automotive, we're looking at helping in the transition to EVs. And so we have a company called Spears that does a lot of the logistics and the remand for batteries when there are battery recalls or when there's sort of failures in batteries, et cetera. We're sort of the hub that does the analysis and the remand of those batteries. We're also building a business to help service fleets, large fleets, trucks with Dickinson Automotive is the sub brand under Cox Automotive that helps support large 18-wheelers as they transport services. So we're building a business in mobility to help to transition and evolve and grow Cox Automotive. And then I talked about the areas of diversification. And so that's the portfolio. And our goal is, again, do right by our customers, do right by the communities, do right by our employees. We also try to invest with purpose. And that purpose has to align to customers, employees, and communities.
Wow, wonderful overview. Thank you. The portfolio you just described, just the trying to understand the finance organization that you rely on, your finance points of contact, unit CFOs who report to you. How does it work exactly? Do you, I mean, we're all sort of living in the past that there's a weekly meeting where you all gather around the table. That's not how it works today.
Yeah.
Over time, your management and skills in this area have really evolved. How do you, what are the finance points of contact? How is it organized?
Yeah. So for Cox, you have to understand that we started as a very decentralized company. So if you were a television station, a radio station, a newspaper, you were employed by that local brand, and you had a general manager of that local brand, and that general manager had a full complement team. Back in 1990, when I started, a lot of those locations had their own AS400 computers, and that's how they provided the technology support. It was all done locally. So very little, there was some consolidation done centrally, but very little. And we also pride ourselves on trying to have decision-making as close to the customer as possible. And so that's always been back of our mind as the businesses and technologies evolve and as the businesses have evolved and matured. Fast forward to today, those AS400s are out. We're taking advantage of the cloud. There's really no need to have technology capability out in the separate locations. You bring that technology centrally and you have a leader doing that. Likewise, in our cable business, sales and marketing is now done centrally. So there's a variety of functions that are done centrally. So within our cable group, there's a CFO. That CFO actually reports to the president of the cable group, who's a peer of mine. Now, I'll visit with that CFO, and we'll make sure that we're aligned. But that CFO focuses on being that business partner to the president of the cable division. He's got financial resources that do accounting and making sure that they are running their business. He's got a biz ops organization that engages with each one of the big functions: sales, marketing, engineering, the operations, etc. They all report up into that CFO. And then that CFO takes advantage of shared services. And so treasury, we will help do the financing. And so we issue debt at Cox Communications. And that CFO will partner with the treasury group, which actually reports up into me, as we do financing at Cox Communications, because that financing at Cox Communications, to the extent there's an investor call, that CFO is driving that investor's call. Likewise, reporting into me is tax, treasury. I have the general counsel reporting to me, but we also, and within the general counsel, we have a center of excellence in litigation and employment law, in M&A. And I have M&A reporting into me, but we have people that are seconded out into the businesses, because let's take M&A. You want to make sure the M&A person who's supporting cable understands the cable business and has credibility with that team. And so even though he technically reports up into someone reporting to me, we want his butt to be in a seat in cable, and we want him to have real credibility with the cable team, so that he's aligned with them on what things to look at to buy. He's aligned with them on what's important relative to attributes of the acquisition, and he's aligned with them as we look to integrate the acquisition into the Cox Communications business. And so, nowadays we operate a very matrixed organization. My direct reports include our diversification sort of team. It includes a strategy group here who helps partner with the other strategy folks so that we can have an integrated and transparent strategic planning process. But that strategy team also looks for new areas for Cox Enterprises to diversify in. I have the M&A function reporting into me. I have the legal report function reporting to me. I have a finance person reporting into me. And that finance person reporting into her has treasury, has risk management. We have a pension fund that reports up into her, has financial reporting, financial accounting, FP&A reporting up into her. And then she reports to me. I have IT reporting into me. And so to technology, there's a lot of technology that is bespoke to Cox Communications and Cox Automotive, but there is some technology that is for the whole company. We have a single instance of Workday for our HCM, sort of our human capital management platform. And the management of that platform is managed by our IT person. We have Office 365. We have collaboration software, a variety of things. And so we need a technology. That technology team also supports the technology needs of the legal function, of the tax function, of the treasury function, et cetera. And so she reports up into me. I have we have a center of excellence for security, even though security is sort of out into the businesses. And that person has security, our aviation group and our real estate group.
As you diversify, and I'm curious over time, maybe the last 10 years, was there a organizational change that you made or Cox made? Is there organizational changes that were required to help you achieve the diversification that you're now pursuing?
So what I would say is over time, the strategy function has evolved at Cox Enterprises and at the divisions based on the needs of the enterprise, the holding company, and based on the needs of the divisions. And so the strategy function over time has been sort of a business advisor helped on the strategic planning sort of calendar and process to facilitate conversations with leadership. Over time, that function has also engaged with M&A, and our M&A has been up and down and different focus based on the needs of the business. And over time, that strategy function has incubated new business, organic business ideas that have some have not worked out, some have worked out and have been birthed and taken over by more of the core operations. Within Cox Enterprises, the holding company, to the diversification point you made, if you go back 5 years, I had one strategy person reporting to me, and he had a team, but that team did M&A. That team incubated, that team facilitated the strategy calendar, et cetera. That effort has grown and over time. We've made several acquisitions. We look at acquisitions being a higher priority and activity level in the next 5 years. And so I brought on more talent, and now I have corporate development, M&A reporting directly to me. I have the person who's operating those diversification businesses that we own more than 50%, we consolidate. That person reports to me. And then I have the strategy person who's helping to think about the strategic framework across the whole business, but then also helping to think about new verticals. That person reports directly to me.
We always like to talk about what we refer to as lines of sight. You're into the business. With data and all the digital tools that are available, we are led to believe that finance leaders can see deeper into the business. They can get real-time data often. How would you characterize your lines of sight into the business today? Are they what you want them to be? Are you sort of on a journey trying to get that real-time data more quickly?
Yeah, so for me personally, real-time data is not as critical. I have teammates and the CFOs of the divisions who real-time data is more personal or is more important. Quite frankly, where I am now in my career journey, what's more important to me is making sure I have the right people who are accountable in the right areas. So it's all about people, succession planning, retention, mentoring, one. And then two, being very thoughtful about capital allocation and making sure we're spending our precious capital in the right areas and making the right decisions on capital allocation. And that requires not just analysis, the what, it requires conversations internally with the teams who are promoting ideas, but also conversations externally with experts to try to get to the best decision in the long-term interests of Cox. And so those are the things that I spend more of my time on. And as we think about the performance of the business and sort of real and sort of financial reporting, I get a sense as to how the business is doing by virtue of conversations with the people who are running the businesses during the course of a month. And if there's any emergency during a month period, I'll get a call. I don't need to have it flash up because I need the story behind it, and I need to understand. Okay, what are next steps to sort of better understand the root causes, whether it was an accident or whatever, and what are the paths to remediation. I'll get a traditional financial reporting package at the end of the month that helps me understand how we perform versus budget versus last year, the traditional sort of pieces. But quite frankly, what's important is the story behind that, and what are the drivers of the variances. And that takes a little bit of time for the team after the day 5, day 6 reporting period to sort of get their hands around, because oftentimes there's conversations that need to happen with the particular owners of the particular places. And so I try to be as patient as I can to wait for those teams to do their work to understand the stories and the drivers so I can better understand it and then make a determination. Hey, is this sort of the same kind of trends we've been seeing, nothing new? And I know the strategic teams are already working on how to harvest the goodness out of that and or how to remediate the badness out of that. And then we'll have conversations with the leaders of those businesses on an every other week sort of cadence. And we'll talk about what's going on in the businesses and how are we thinking about the future and whatnot. So a little bit of a longer answer, but real-time information isn't, to me, it's more about the storytelling and more about hearing the drivers and the remediate and the plans, remediation, harvest, et cetera.
Wanted to, before we jump to our finance strategic moment, I wanted to ask you about AI. I imagine there's quite a few conversations that have taken place. The company's already leveraging AI in multiple areas, no doubt, with some of its applications already having some AI functionality at it, what have you. Any thoughts on AI and how it's going to impact how finance functions inside Cox?
Sure. The way I think about AI is I think about it, I don't think about it as a step function as much as it may be reported in the press. I think about it as a continuation of intelligent automation. And we've been on this journey now for 5-10 years. It starts with getting your data house in order, making it accessible, normalizing it, bringing it all together. Once it's together, then get the right analytics teams, the right machine learning teams to sort of glean insights and information out of it. Once you bring these capabilities together, you can then look to automation opportunities. And so we started on robotic process automation 5-7 years ago. And we have a variety of bots across multiple different functions and groups across the businesses and the functional areas. And the capabilities of those bots have continued to increase. Chat bots, again, intelligent automation, and we're trying to leverage those where they make sense. If you then sort of continue the trend and you move to, quote, generative AI, chat GPT, there are opportunities for us to leverage that in some areas. In some areas, it doesn't make sense to leverage that, and we'll continue to leverage other capabilities in intelligent automation. Microsoft has introduced Copilot, and so our automotive group has 200 licenses of Copilot, and it's expensive. And so we're going to see how much that really drives efficiencies in terms of the way people use Office 365 to do their day job. And if it creates efficiencies that we can see and there's real benefit to Cox, then we'll engage with Microsoft on accessing more licenses of Copilot. And so we'll look at the various technology providers and how they're using new forms of AI and see how it makes sense for us to do better what we're doing, and where are the applications to drive. I'll give you one other example. Within our communications group, we're using machine learning and data analytics to better understand the state of the plant and be more predictive about where there are likely to be failures so we can go remediate before it requires an emergency truck roll or before it disrupts customers. And so we're saving money in calls and unnecessary calls and unnecessary truck rolls. So we're trying to use it across the whole business, how and where it makes sense.
Great insights there for us. Thank you for that. We're up to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you just for one moment of insight that you've experienced along the way that you view as a highly strategic moment for you and the company. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
So when you ask me about that, it's not dissimilar to when people say, what was the job that felt it impacted me the most? And I'll go back to my investor relations days from 95 to 2000. And the reason I have picked investor relations is it's back to storytelling. You have to be able to understand the business, and you could be an investor relations person and choose to simply be a traffic cop. And when an analyst, an investor asks a technology questions as investor relations, you go get the CTO to come in and provide the answer. I decided that, you know what? I wanted to engage on those questions. I wanted to understand the answers. And over time, rather than having to go get the CTO, I could give the answer. And so I became an important sort of partner with our shareholders to help them understand our business. I became an important partner to our business to understand the needs of our shareholders. It helped me to better understand the drivers of our business. It helped me to understand the critical limitations of our business. It helped me to understand how to communicate. Our public affairs comms team loves putting me out in front of the press because I know how to communicate the story without communicating confidential information. Our litigation team loves putting me on the stand because, whether you're being deposed or whether you're on the stand, opposing counsel will oftentimes want to try to trick you. But I learned the ability to understand the real question. I learned the ability to tell our story, maybe not directly answering the question, but tell it in a compelling way. And what I would say is that role of investor relations came at a critical point in my career, and I learned a lot about the business and how to understand it from a variety of vantage points and how to think more broadly about it.
From episode 828, this is 1 Minute with Claire Bromley, CFO of Teradata.
We were 1 year in to our cloud transformation journey. So one of the things I pretty much spent the first few months doing with the team is ensuring that we understood what were the assumptions, what was the pipeline, where's that growth coming from? And the things that we looked at, as you would expect, is how can we expand with our existing customers? How can we attract new customers, so through new logos? How can we ensure that we're not losing existing customers, so through erosion or cancellations? So we did a lot of work, and we spend at least weekly kind of looking at what does our pipeline look like for the current quarter, but also for the next 12 months.
We begin usually with a question: if you could go back in time and the first 90 days you were a CFO and give yourself advice, I'd be more interested in asking you to go back to 1995. If there's one thing you could have whispered in your ear wherever you were on your career trajectory in the mid-90s, what is it that you would have told yourself? Clearly, your younger self, there's something you learned in the other 20 years, 25 years. What is it that you would have told your younger self?
Two things. Number one, I would have told myself that when people say patience is a virtue, that's actually true, and that you ought to not be so anxious and you ought to be patient. And it is a virtue, and don't underestimate sort of patience and time. So that's one. And then two, oftentimes when there's a disagreement, you spend a lot of time trying to defend your position and not enough time understanding the other person's position. And I learned that I can't deny how someone else feels. And so I have to accept the way they feel, try to understand it as best I can, and try to work with them from where they are. And I did not appreciate that in my early career. And so I think I've taken more time to try to understand other people, what drives them, much more so now at this stage than I was earlier in my career.
Nice. Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. Dallas, we're wondering if you have a habit or part of a daily routine that you're known for. It might be something one of your daughters would point out to us. Why does he do it? Why does he always do that? Anything that sets you apart a little?
Anything that sets me apart a little bit. Well, I think everyone needs a diversion outside of the day-to-day work, and for some people, that mindfulness or that diversion could be religion, could be prayer. For me, it's squash. I play regular squash. I enjoy the competition. I enjoy the exercise. I've recently been introduced to a new racket sport called padel. You might have thought I was going to say pickleball. Padel is hugely popular outside of the United States. And it's much more complicated, than pickleball. It's sort of a mix of squash and tennis. So I love racket sports. I love the community. It's completely outside of the day-to-day work. I can't think about work when I'm in the middle of a point, in the middle of a competitive match. It's great exercise. It's good people. It's a lot of fun. So that's sort of the thing that makes me unique, I think.
We always like to ask for a book selection. Don't know if you have a book that you think influenced your thinking along the way. Maybe it's something you escaped with. I don't know. Would you have a book for us you'd like to recommend?
I'm laughing because earlier in the interview, I talked about the session I had with the interns 2 weeks ago, and the comms team that was sort of doing it, they said, you have a book to recommend. And I said, I read a lot of nonfictions. I don't really read business books. And they said, well, you could do a nonfiction. I said, okay, I know what I'll do. When I was in college, I took a class that I thought was a religious studies. It ended up being a women's studies class. And the book that I have shared with my daughters and I reflect on is Deborah Tannen's You Just Don't Understand. And she talks about how the stereotypical woman speaks from the one down. What do you think about this? What about this? How about that? Stereotypical guy speaks from the one up. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going here. And her point was that neither is wrong or right. It's all situational. It's all contextual. And the best leaders, the best thinkers, the best communicators who are the ones who know contextually when to play the one up, when to play the one down. And I found with 4 very different daughters, a wife, and this it's not, I'm saying this book, it's not a male-female thing. We're all different, and there's different situations, and we all have to learn to sort of behave in the how, back to my what and how, behave in the how that is contextual and appropriate for whatever the situation is we're in. And so that's the book, Deborah Tannen, You Just Don't Understand.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We are up to our final question. We'll ask you to look forward finally for us. We're wondering what your priorities are as CFO of Cox Enterprises for the coming 12 months, your priorities.
So for the coming 12 months, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, it's primarily people. We have a CFO that's retiring in our automotive group. We got to get a new CFO there. I've got one of my leaders that is looking at possibly retiring. I got to make sure we have the appropriate succession planning for that role. That's hugely important to me and important to Cox. We have a number, and then the next bucket is capital allocation. And so we have a number of investment opportunities, acquisition opportunities, and we want to make sure we're smart and thoughtful about which ones to pull the trigger on and do, and which ones to pass on. And so it's people and capital allocation are my 2 priorities.
Dallas Clement, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com, and of course our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.